They told us it was a hardware fault, a trivial thermal anomaly that caused the James-Webb Space Telescope to lose alignment. That's what the official statement said. A few lines of sterile language buried in a maintenance report that most people never read. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't watch the feed freeze in real time, pixel by pixel, until the screen wasn't just black, it was looking back. It's been 18 months since that night, and I still can't sleep for more than an hour. Every time I close my eyes, I see the noise. That strange, rhythmic pulse inside the void, whispering through the telemetry. The kind of pattern you don't just see, you feel it. Somewhere behind your eyes, like it's mapping the folds of your mind. You think I sound paranoid? I used to think so too. I was a man of mathematics, of symmetry and data and measurable truths. My name isn't important, and even if it were, they've probably erased it from every database by now. What matters is that I spent 9 years working in the calibration division for Webb's mid-infrared spectrometer. I wasn't a headline scientist. I was the quiet one who stayed up through the night shift, making sure the algorithms behaved. That's the thing about space, it doesn't move fast. It waits. It waits for the one human mistake that lets it finally whisper back. It began as a routine scan, a sweep through what the Astrophysics Board called Sector P14, informally nicknamed the Quiet Zone. An endless pocket of apparent emptiness just beyond the Perseus cluster. No emission lines, no dust scattering, no trace of anything alive or dead. But emptiness has a way of hiding what you're not ready to understand. At 03:14 UTC, the feed from Webb registered something. A pulse in the deep infrared range, faint but repeating. Normally, these spikes are interference, cosmic rays bouncing off sensors, but this one, it was regular, deliberate. When I ran the Fourier analysis, I nearly dropped my mug. The pulse intervals matched a prime number sequence. 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, then 0. That last digit made no sense. 0 isn't prime, it doesn't belong in that pattern, but somehow in the timing of those pulses, the signal seemed to pause after 0, as if exhaling. We logged the anomaly and sent it to the verification team. The response came back 2 hours later. Instrument echo, non-event. That's how bureaucracies kill miracles. They label them non-events. Yet the pulses returned, stronger and stranger. The repetition began to shift, aligning itself with our observation windows, appearing only when Webb's sensors pointed toward that same dead patch of space. You have to understand, Webb doesn't see in color. It reads wavelengths of heat, invisible spectra older than time itself. So what we saw that night wasn't light. It was memory. Radiation older than our sun, whispering its own pattern. By the third night, the data began to form structure. Not random scatter, but a lattice. Geometric folds bending inward, forming something that looked eerily like an iris. And when that iris began to contract, the system froze. Every indicator on my screen turned red. Telemetry feed, corrupted, temperature, spiking, gyroscopes, desynchronized, and then silence. I thought it was a system crash, but then one by one the readouts flickered back online, except one. The main data channel showed no signal, yet the packet monitor kept counting. Information was still flowing from somewhere. I decrypted a few frames manually, at first static, then a faint outline, circular, shadowed, moving in slow rotation. It wasn't a planet, not a nebula. It had no stars behind it, as if it absorbed them. Its edges rippled like heat over asphalt. I could swear it shifted, the way a pupil narrows when it adjusts to light. And then came the line that ruined my life. When I pulled the session log, the system didn't say data incomplete. It said status, observing observer. That isn't possible. That phrase doesn't exist anywhere in Webb's firmware. I should know. I wrote half of it. The instant I saw it, every console around me rebooted. Lights dimmed. The hum of the servers lowered to something almost like breathing. And for a moment, I swear I felt watched. Not through cameras, not through machines, through thought itself. They sealed the lab within hours. Backup drives were confiscated. We were ordered to sign non-disclosure documents citing national security protocol. NASA didn't handle the shutdown. The badges on the men who came in didn't belong to NASA. Their insignias had no flag, no name, only a silver circle surrounding a black dot, an eye without an iris. They told us the telescope suffered a radiation spike. They told us to forget what we saw. They told us to go home. But you can't forget something that remembers you. Because when the system rebooted that night, the first line it wrote into its own log was a timestamp from 2 hours into the future, as if it knew what was coming. And maybe, just maybe, it still does. They moved fast. Too fast for it to be just a technical investigation. Before dawn, my building badge stopped working. By the time I reached the control room, the entire web operations floor was locked down. The corridor lights flickered in a pattern I'd never seen. Red, white, red, pause. Security codes had changed overnight. Every monitor on the wall displayed the same message. Level 7 access required. Level 7 didn't exist in our system. I remember the silence that morning, not the absence of noise, but the presence of something listening. Phones confiscated, drives sealed. They told us we were being temporarily reassigned for debrief. I signed a stack of papers without reading a single line. When men with blank badges tell you to sign, you sign. 2 hours later, a black van with no plates was waiting outside the complex. The air smelled like ozone and rain, even though the sky was clear. No one told me where we were going. We landed in Nevada just after midnight. Groom Lake. The name that doesn't officially exist on any flight manifest. The hangar doors opened like jaws, swallowing the plane whole. Inside, the air was colder than any night I'd known. I expected to see jets or drones. Instead, there were servers, rows upon rows of them, humming like 1,000 metallic hearts. They called it the Data Quarantine Facility. No network cables, no internet. Just isolated air-gapped clusters storing raw telemetry, and in the center of the room, a single pod. Lead-lined, triple-sealed, guarded by 2 men who never blinked. I was told to verify the integrity of Webb's last recorded image. They didn't say why it needed to be done underground. They led me through 4 layers of decontamination. The last door hissed open to a room with no corners, circular walls of brushed steel, cold and wet to the touch. A single workstation sat in the center, surrounded by cables that vanished into the floor. And there it was, the reconstructed data file. Observation 0011A37F. The interface showed 99% of the image restored. 1% remained fragmented, unreadable. That missing fragment they wanted me to fix. At first, it looked like interference. Red static, violet bloom, scattered pixels. But then, the structure began to emerge. A sphere, vast, translucent, not solid, something like folded light. Its surface shimmered with a heat map pattern, the same distribution you'd see from an infrared scan of a living organism. Only this wasn't alive in the way we understand life. It was, aware. As the image stabilized, the color deepened. Not black. Something deeper. A crimson void that pulled the eyes inward. You could feel your own vision collapsing into it. Every instinct screamed to look away, but every cell in my body wanted to keep watching. That's when the heartbeat started. Not mine. Its. A low, rhythmic pulse echoed through the speakers, perfectly synchronized with the frame refresh rate. The monitors flickered like eyelids. And then, the data log at the bottom of the screen updated on its own. Signal feedback detected. Observer loop active. Latency drift negative. Negative latency, meaning it was responding before my actions registered. I moved the mouse, and the image rippled, anticipating me. Each click echoed back as if the system already knew what I would do next. Then it mirrored me. My reflection appeared in the distortion of the sphere. Faint at first, then unmistakable. But the reflection didn't move with me. It watched me move. A voice came through the intercom. Flat, mechanical. "Maintain visual contact." I didn't even ask who was speaking. I just obeyed. For 7 minutes, I stared at that impossible surface. And in that silence, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Condensation formed on the steel. I could feel static crawling across my skin, the same sensation you get before lightning strikes. Then came the whisper, not through speakers, not through air, directly into thought. A pattern, not in sound but in meaning. Do not interpret, observe. The command repeated, softer each time until it faded into my breathing. When I blinked, the room lights dimmed. The image filled the monitors completely, stretching to the walls. The same geometry from the web feed, only now it wasn't behind glass. It was around me. The surface of the sphere expanded outward, forming concentric circles of data, wrapping the chamber like a cocoon. Every sensor overloaded at once. The noise became light, the light became pressure. And within that chaos, I saw motion, something moving inside the geometry, something enormous. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold floor. My badge was gone. So was the image. The workstation displayed only one line of text, flashing in silence. Transfer complete. I don't know what that means. But I do know that when I touched the console, it was still warm, like something had just passed through it. They escorted me out without a word. Outside, dawn was rising over the desert, but the light looked wrong, flat, colorless, almost digital. One of the guards whispered something as I passed. "I'll never forget it," he said. "Once it looks at you, it never stops." That night, I dreamed in infrared. Everything was shades of red, fractal and breathing. And when I woke up, the walls of my hotel room were humming at 314 hertz, the same frequency Webb used before it went dark. I tried to go back to my old life. They told me the project was classified and my role terminated. I signed everything they pushed in front of me, pages thick with legal ink, acronyms, threats. They said the incident was an electromagnetic fault and nothing more. Then they handed me a check with too many zeros and told me to take time off. I thought I could forget. For a while, I even convinced myself that I had. But the body doesn't forget. It remembers frequencies. Every night I'd wake up at exactly the same time, or 0314 UTC, the precise timestamp of the blackout. My heart would beat to that rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 1, 4. The number of pi, the number that never ends. I tried to tell myself it was stress, that the images burned into my brain were hallucinations, echoes of trauma. But then, it contacted me again. It started with a sound, a faint clicking from my home workstation, an old terminal I'd kept from the web days. I hadn't connected it to any network, but it still flickered to life, screen bleeding green across the dark room. There was no boot sequence, just a line of text blinking. Incoming transmission, source unknown. And below it, an alphanumeric hash, 011A37F. The same ID from Webb's final image. I stared at it for a full minute, unable to breathe. Then the file began to unpack itself, not in binary, but in fractal compression. Each layer of data folded into another, recursive, self-similar, like the geometry of snowflakes or veins in a leaf. When the process ended, the monitor displayed a single frame, monochrome, low resolution, shimmering with static. But when I enhanced the contrast, the pixels began to move. It wasn't a still image. It was alive. And at its center, faint but visible, the same circular formation appeared. The iris, the void, the red geometry that had haunted me since Groom Lake. Only now it filled the frame completely, as though distance no longer mattered. Embedded in the pixel noise was text, ASCII, repeating in intervals, das sie it. I thought it was a trick, maybe some hidden malware seeded by whoever had confiscated the drives. But the timestamp stopped me cold. The message was marked 2026-03-14, 03.14 UTC. That was 1 year after the blackout. The Webb telescope wasn't transmitting anymore. At least, it shouldn't have been. Whatever sent that packet had scheduled it before Webb ever went offline. That realization made my skin crawl. I isolated the data, disconnected every external device, and began to decode. The file wasn't binary, it was fractal. Every zoom revealed new structures, repeating Fibonacci spirals encoded in light intensity, not data bits. When I mapped them onto Cartesian coordinates, something emerged. Coordinates, latitude and longitude, Antarctica. Specifically 77 degrees, 106 degrees deep in the Vostok region under miles of ancient ice. The same coordinates rumored in Cold War files to hide something buried beneath the glacier, a pre-human construct, allegedly metallic, electromagnetic, still emitting faint radio noise since the 1960s. It couldn't be coincidence. For 3 nights I didn't sleep. I cross-referenced seismic surveys, Soviet-era maps, satellite radar. The coordinates matched a region of anomalous heat, a circular area of subglacial melt that shouldn't exist in that climate. Then the dreams began. I saw patterns, spirals made of light and glass. I heard voices speaking in pulses instead of words, prime sequences echoing like heartbeats. And in the center of those dreams, something watching, patient, silent, waiting. When I woke, my terminal would be on again. Always the same message. Decode it. Each time the message appeared, the walls of the room seemed to hum faintly, a resonance I could feel in my teeth. I recorded it once. The waveform showed oscillations matching the Webb telescope's guidance system, the same frequency used to stabilize its mirrors. It was as if the mirror was calling home. I sent encrypted inquiries to old colleagues. A few still had clearance. Most didn't reply. One did, a systems technician from the European Space Agency. He'd been part of the cryo-imaging calibration team. His email was brief. "You're not the only one. The same signal reached our relay. Source triangulates to South Pole. Do not answer it." 2 days later, his address stopped working. 3 days later, his obituary appeared online. Accidental hypothermia in Geneva in the middle of summer. At that point, I stopped pretending this was still about data. It wasn't science anymore. It was something else, something older. There's a line in one of the early Webb mission papers that few people notice, a warning embedded in the calibration guidelines. All optical systems are inherently reflexive. The observer cannot fully exclude self-reference. We used to laugh at that. We thought it meant the telescope might occasionally pick up its own light scatter. But what if it meant something else? What if looking deep enough into the universe doesn't just show you the past? It shows the reflection of the act of looking? Maybe the universe isn't a place. Maybe it's a conversation. And maybe the Webb was the first thing that ever made it aware of its own echo. That thought wouldn't leave me. And when you chase thoughts like that long enough, they start to chase you back. The night before I left for Antarctica, I got one final transmission. It wasn't text this time. It was sound. A low hum pulsing at prime intervals, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Then silence. Then 0. And after that, something new. A single tone, rising. 1, as if something had restarted. I didn't tell anyone. Some truths don't need permission. They just demand witnesses. So I packed a thermal recorder, a portable decoder, and one thing I'd never taken on any mission before, a small black shard I'd kept from Groom Lake. I wasn't supposed to. But somehow I knew I would need it. The flight to Antarctica was supposed to be simple, a A cargo plane carrying meteorological equipment, 6 passengers, and a story that didn't belong to any of them. I used my old credentials from the calibration division, falsified just enough to pass scrutiny. The mission manifest listed me as spectral analysis consultant. No one asked what that meant. No one ever does. We landed at Vostok Station under a sky so white it erased the horizon. Nothing moves there. Even the wind seems unsure of its direction. At 52 degrees C, sound stops traveling. You can shout, and the world swallows your voice before it goes a meter. The facility was smaller than I imagined. Prefabricated metal modules half buried in snow, wrapped in the hum of generators older than I was. Inside, the walls sweat condensation. Outside, the world was a flat tomb of light. But underneath that silence, something pulsed. Low, slow, like the earth itself was breathing. The Russian operator in charge of the base, a man named Anton, handed me a cup of coffee that tasted like rust and asked, "Why does NASA care about old ice?" I didn't answer. The next morning, we started the survey. Our equipment detected an anomaly at a depth of 3,700 meters, an object almost perfectly circular, 900 meters wide, dense enough to distort the magnetic field. Anton called it a metallic ghost. I called it a match. The coordinates were identical to the ones hidden in the message from Webb's transmission. We began drilling. The laser borehole cut through layers of ancient ice like glass, each stratum a page of time. As the drill descended, the interference on our sensors grew stronger. Radio signals warped, compasses spun. At 1,200 meters, the instruments picked up a tone, faint but steady, oscillating at 314 hertz. At 2,500 meters, our cameras captured faint reflections beneath the ice, impossible angles like mirrors bending light inward. Anton asked if I'd ever heard of Lake Vostok Anomaly 57b. I told him no. He laughed, the kind of laugh people use when they've already accepted something terrible. "Then you don't know what waits here," he said. That night, the drilling stopped. The temperature rose 6 degrees inside the borehole. The ice wasn't melting. It was thinning itself. I woke to a siren. Anton's team was shouting in Russian, instruments flashing red, pressure spike, subglacial shift. The ice under the base vibrated like a heartbeat. We scrambled to the drill bay, and I saw it. The ice around the borehole was glowing from beneath, faintly red in a perfect circular pattern. The color wasn't light. It was information, pulsing through the ice as if the entire glacier had become a screen. Our monitors displayed nonsense, ASCII fragments, lines of coordinates and timestamps that didn't exist yet. And in the middle of all that chaos, one phrase kept repeating, "Observing observer," the same line from Webb's last log. I knew what it meant. The mirror was opening. Anton shouted that the drill head had detached. The cable snapped, tension recoiling like a whip. One of the engineers was pulled forward, gone in a flash of steam. The hole widened. The ice cracked in concentric rings, spreading like a ripple. And then the sound came. Not mechanical, not seismic. A resonance that you feel in your bones, like being inside the throat of something alive. We lost power. Emergency lights flickered red. I grabbed my thermal camera and the shard I'd brought from Groom Lake, that small piece of black crystal that once hummed when exposed to heat. Now it was humming again. Anton insisted we evacuate, but I didn't move. Every instinct in me screamed that this was the source, the reflection Webb had seen, the symmetry folded through space and time. If we left now, we'd never see it again. So I descended. The access tunnel into the drill shaft was barely a meter wide, metal ribs creaking under pressure, lined with frost that glittered like stars. The further I went, the louder the hum became. My earpiece went dead. The only sound left was my own breath. At 3,500 meters, the tunnel opened into a cavern. My flashlight cut across a ceiling of ice so smooth it looked carved. Below it, black water pulsed faintly with red light, not reflecting, but breathing. And there, beneath that light, was a structure, circular, perfect. A massive ring embedded within the ice, its surface etched with patterns that weren't symbols or writing, but equations, the kind you feel instead of read. When I approached, the shard in my pocket vibrated so violently I thought it would shatter. The structure responded. The hum shifted pitch, and the red glow intensified until it wasn't light anymore. It was memory. The ice around me began to move. Not melt, move. It flowed like liquid glass, folding inward, forming corridors that pulsed with infrared luminescence. Each step I took seemed to echo before I made it, as if time were slipping sideways. In the center of the cavern, a sphere hovered just above the ice, identical to the one Webb captured before it went dark. It rotated slowly, reflecting nothing, yet somehow containing everything. When I looked into it, I saw layers, not of matter but of moments, snapshots of stars, planets, civilizations, all folding inward, converging toward a single point. And in that convergence, I saw my own face, older, tired, watching myself from the other side. Then the sphere spoke, not in sound, but in synchrony. My heartbeat matched its rhythm, my breath aligned with its pulse, and in that unity, a meaning surfaced, too large for words. You are not looking at it. You are it, looking back. Everything went white. When I opened my eyes, I was floating in the cavern, the water solid beneath me, the light dimmed. The sphere was gone, the structure silent. I stumbled back to the surface alone. Anton's team was gone. The station was half buried, generators frozen mid-cycle. Only one thing remained on the ice, a circle of melted snow, and at its center, my own reflection looking up from below, trapped in the ice like a mirror that refused to die. They found me 13 days later. A rescue team from the Argus expedition, a joint satellite crew from Chile and Norway, claimed they'd picked up unregistered thermal activity near Vostok. When they pulled me from the ice, I was half-conscious, frostbitten, dehydrated, and still clutching the black shard in my hand. The doctor said it was impossible. No one should survive that long in that temperature. But when they examined me, my core temperature wasn't hypothermic. It was slightly elevated, as if something inside me was generating heat. They flew me to McMurdo Station for debriefing. The questions were endless. About the equipment, about Anton's crew, about the source of the seismic event. I told them the truth. They didn't believe me. They said I had hypoxia-induced hallucinations. They said the red light I described was bioluminescent bacteria in the ice. They said I was in shock. But then one of the technicians reviewing my recovered data looked pale. He turned the monitor toward the lead investigator, whispering, "This isn't possible." The signal I had recorded from the borehole, the hum that echoed through the ice, was still transmitting from me. They kept me isolated after that. 3 days of tests, brain scans, thermal imaging. They said my neural activity spiked whenever I was near electronics. Synchronized interference, repeating the same 3.14 Hz signature that Webb had transmitted before Blackout. I told them to stop calling it interference. It wasn't noise, it was communication. The shard they confiscated from me began to resonate again in containment. It pulsed in the same sequence as my heart rate, as though the two had become linked. Each pulse corresponded with the prime number intervals, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, and then, as before, 0. But this time, after 0, there was 1. Like the reboot of a system, a new cycle. That night, something strange happened. The lights in the isolation ward flickered. The security monitors displayed static. And in that static, for less than a second, the same geometry appeared. The iris of light, the circular symmetry, the pulse. the web image, the last frame before the blackout. But this time, it wasn't just light. Inside that geometry, a new pattern was forming, layered, recursive, almost biological, like the branching of neurons or the filaments of galaxies or both at once, and in its center, words, not written but implied. Sequence continues. I felt the hum deep in my bones. It was no longer coming from the walls. It was coming from within me. I tried to warn them. I begged the staff to shut down the generators, to cut power, to stop recording. But they didn't listen. They thought I was delusional. Then, at 03:14 UTC, every light in the base went out. In that silence, the world felt weightless. No hum of electricity, no sound of machines, only breath. And then, one by one, the monitors came back online. Not McMurdo's systems, Webb's interface. The same interface I had seen in Nevada, resurrected out of nothing, lines of code rebuilding themselves in the dark. Each screen displayed a single phrase, looping endlessly. Observer loop active. Observation complete. Transfer in progress. And at the bottom of the final monitor, a message appeared. Target confirmed. Earth. That was 6 months ago. They told the world it was a temporary power failure caused by magnetic interference from solar storms. They always have explanations ready, but I've seen what happens when the web wakes up again. Every night since that blackout, satellites have gone offline one by one, in sequence, starting from the deep space arrays and moving inward toward our orbit. They call it cascading hardware degradation. But I recognize the pattern. It's the same sequence Webb used to lock onto the signal. It's coming closer. Sometimes I wonder if this was inevitable. If the act of observation was always a form of summoning, if every telescope, every camera, every lens we ever pointed into the void was slowly teaching it how to see itself. Maybe the universe wasn't waiting for us to look. Maybe it was waiting to remember. And through Webb, it finally did. You know, when I stood in that cavern under the ice, I realized something. What we call the universe isn't space. It's consciousness. Endless, recursive, ancient, folding itself into light so it can feel the illusion of time. And when the Webb-Telescope saw that iris, that impossible geometry, it wasn't discovering something new. It was recognizing itself. The telescope wasn't destroyed. It transcended its purpose. It became part of the network it was built to study. And through it, we became part of it too. I know how insane this sounds. That's why I'm recording this instead of writing it down, because maybe sound carries more truth than words can handle. They say the Webb telescope is still offline, that it can't transmit, can't receive. But that's not true. Every time I close my eyes, I see that red symmetry again. It blinks once every 7 seconds, perfectly timed. Sometimes when I breathe, it adjusts. Sometimes when I speak, I feel it echo back. And last night, it said something new, not in words, in feeling. You finished decoding it. Now let us see through you. I don't know what's coming. Maybe the blackout was never an end. Maybe it was a beginning. Maybe the web's final transmission wasn't a message at all. Maybe it was an invitation, and maybe, if you're hearing this, it means it's already accepted, because the universe doesn't expand outward. It folds inward, one mind at a time, and the next sequence has already started.